This game is a big challenge for me to discuss, because both times that I have played through it, I didn't think it was absolutely terrible like many people have said. I just hated playing through it for a multitude of reasons. Now, of course, the first time was a few years back, and I decided to give it another chance recently. If you've seen my weekly streams, you could recall my love for these two games in particular. But since I know most of my current audience lacks the, culture, I will give a brief history lesson. Rare is a still existing developer that used to make games for mostly Nintendo consoles. Widely known for the Donkey Kong Country trilogy, Donkey Kong 64, GoldenEye, Perfect Dark, Conker, and what I personally care about the most, Banjo-Kazooie and Tooie. Rare was effectively a second-party developer for Nintendo, with roughly half of Rare itself being owned by Nintendo at its height. In a surprising turn of events, however, Microsoft acquired Rare for $375 million in 2002. According to former Vice President of Game Publishing at Microsoft, Ed Fries, a few interesting things happened behind the scenes at the time. At the time, Nintendo owned half of Rare, so if Microsoft had bid low, the House of Mario could have easily taken control of the entire studio. So, there's a problem. If we drive a hard bargain and put in a low price for Rare, Nintendo would have the chance to buy at that low price, and probably would, Fries reasoned, so the price was high. Activision was also apparently involved. Rare co-founder Tim Stamper has been outspoken with it being a strange decision that Nintendo didn't buy the company outright, but I guess Nintendo wasn't willing to compete with Microsoft on the amount of money that was on the bidding table. Regardless, Rare was absorbed into the Xbox sphere, and produced games like Grabbed by the Ghoulies, Viva Pinata, this game we don't talk about in this house, and Connect Sports. Yeah, many people describe what has happened to Rare as a relative downturn, but we're not here to dive into that subject. Over time, many notable employees at Rare left the company to do their own thing, but many left to form Playtonic Games in late 2014. Some of which included Steve Hurst, Steve Mails, Gavin Price, Chris Sutherland, and later on, motherfucking Grant Kirkhope.
You dragged me all the way over here from Agora Hills to watch you do this? You fucking wankers, I'm going. Fuck you.
Playtonic planned to produce a spiritual successor to Banjo-Kazooie, which led to Yooka-Laylee. The game was thrown on Kickstarter and was massively successful, raking in over 2 million fucking pounds. The game was then released in 2017 and was met with a very mixed reception. I'm a massive fan of the N64 Banjo games, but Tooie especially holds a special place in my heart. While I never finished the game while I was a kid, I ended up finishing it later on, and it has now been enshrined on my game shelf. I love Kazooie as well, but not as much. My eyes were then set on a hopeful third entry into the series that wasn't a Game Boy Advance game at the time, but unfortunately that never happened. Yes, there was this game we don't talk about in this house, but it seemed like the Bear and Bird duo were not coming back anytime soon. Fast forward to 2015, and I heard about Yooka-Laylee's development, and I was of course ecstatic about it. It's made by the same people who made one of your favorite games of all time. Nothing could possibly go wrong. I got around to playing the game in late 2019, and I was not amused. My excitement faded very quickly, and my first 17-hour playthrough turned into pure disappointment and confusion. However, because of that, I wasn't able to wrap my head around why I hated my experience with the game, because I just wanted to move on to something else. Fast forward again to this year, I decided to give the game another chance for a video review. Perhaps I was just unreasonable the first time around, right? I mean, like I said, Yooka-Laylee came straight from the people who knew their shit when it came to the titles that preceded it roughly 2 decades prior. So, let's begin. I loaded up the game, got to the main menu, and noticed that my first save file from years back was still here. So I picked file 2 and began my second playthrough. The plot here is that Yooka and Laylee's book is stolen by Ivory Towers, headed by Capital B with the help of Dr. Quack. The book itself has its magical pages ripped out in the process, which are pretty important to Capital B, leaving Yooka and Laylee to collect them from the various worlds in Ivory Towers. A pretty straightforward plot, more like Banjo-Kazooie, departing from the darker tones of Banjo-Tooie, and that's perfectly fine. However, something that I did notice immediately is that the quality of written dialogue has taken an absolute plunge. The breaking the fourth wall snarky British humor of Banjo-Tooie seems almost absent in Yooka-Laylee. I think I got a chuckle or two from some jokes, and that's about it really. Other than that, the quality of the dialogue overall just really really wasn't that great. Now, yes, I know, very subjective, but to those who have really played these two games, noticing the dip in quality is something that many of those who have played Kazooie and Tooie have spoken up about. I mean, seriously, one of the first memorable jokes in Tooie is after Bottles dies, and Kazooie just says he wasn't everyone's favorite in the previous game anyways. Or that time when you had to beat up some dragons because they thought Banjo was the pizza boy. I don't know, I don't think I'm the only one who feels like this. Anyways, we move on to the tutorial area with this game's version of Bottles and Jam Jars, Trouser the Snake, and yes, that name is a euphemism for a dick. Trouser is a salesman who thinks he is the best salesman ever, and I think he's alright in the role that he serves. We then get into the actual meat of the hub world, Ivory Towers. Now, hub worlds are a source of big debate on whether or not they should be necessarily added into a game like this. I'm personally favorable to them as long as a hub world's design is well thought out, makes you truly feel like you're on a big adventure, and isn't confusing to navigate. In my experience, while I didn't find Ivory Towers to be confusing, it certainly wasn't a breeze to move around it. It seems to have taken more notes from Gruntilda's Lair rather than ILO Hags, which is fine, but the hub world overall doesn't feel as well connected as it should. There are signs that point to you where the actual levels are, but for some reason the warp pads and silos from Tooie are just gone. When you had to backtrack to certain levels in Tooie, moving around quickly with the warp silos and pads made everything much quicker and less painful. In Yooka-Laylee, when you have to backtrack through Ivory Towers, there are shortcuts that you can activate to go back to previous areas faster, but you still spend more time walking. Speaking of walking, something is wrong with the way these characters control, as if Yooka and Laylee are too stiff along with the godforsaken camera that I was fighting roughly a third of the time. I thought this might have been an issue with me using a keyboard, so I switched to my controller and changed my sensitivity, only to find out that it didn't help either. I don't understand how they fucked this up. It's a very integral aspect to a platformer to not fuck up your controls and camera, but they somehow did. God damn it. Now we move on to the first world, Tribal Stack Tropics. Of course, the same thing you're used to by now, find the main collectibles around the levels while still having to complete certain tasks. There are the 5 Ghost Riders in every world, taking the place of the Jinjos. I actually like these ghosty boys because each one has a different way of collecting it. When you get all 5, you get a Pagey. Also, their collection sound is pretty satisfying. Quills take the place of notes as the currency for more of Trouser's moves, as well as a Pagey being rewarded for finding all 200 quills in each world. Another big complaint here, quills aren't placed cohesively in any of these levels. Whoever was in charge of their placement pretty much vomited them everywhere on each level. Good luck collecting all 200 quills in a level without having to cheat.
You're familiar with Billy Mitchell, world video game champion? He could probably do it. So I gotta find a way to harness his power, and I think I found a way.
That's right, we're gonna cheat.
First impressions on the level itself? Not very good. When I played the first time, something about this world felt wrong. Very wrong. After a while, I started to piece together my thoughts. Altogether, these worlds are largely lacking in interesting sights to look at. There's a lot of terrain that exists with collectibles dotted throughout, but lacking in notable landmarks and terrain that the worlds in Tooie had. Don't get me wrong, Tooie had issues with this too, like in the level Pterodactyl Land, but this issue persists super hard in Yooka-Laylee. Oh yeah, Shovel Knight is here. Okay then. Anyways, every level also has a minigame section with this guy, Kartos. These minigames are reminiscent of the minecart sections from Donkey Kong Country, and they suck a massive pile of ass. You have to grab a number of gems without getting hit by obstacles, otherwise you'll lose gems, and for some reason, the camera is set to a slight angle instead of a 2D perspective. This threw me the hell off and made the later Kartos sections harder than what they should have been, especially with a very specific boss fight which we'll get into later. There are also these retro-themed minigames, and they're okay, I guess. I don't have any strong feelings towards these or against these. They just exist for more pages, I guess. Yeah, I'm just not a particular fan of them, but I don't think they're absolutely terrible. Look, I know this is supposed to be a spiritual successor, but it really feels like this game is only checkmarking boxes and doing very little to innovate and separate Yooka-Laylee from its predecessors, which leads me into the game's main gimmick mechanic, as far as I see it, the mechanic of expanding the worlds. This feature is advertised alongside other mechanics as giving every player their own unique experience and carving their own path, which is, very strange to say. The whole mechanic of expanding worlds isn't as special as the developers made it out to be. All it does is make the levels that already have the aforementioned design flaws and then just doubles its size. When you really think about it, it makes you question why this was even a feature in the first place. You already got the satisfaction of opening up a new level. I don't understand the whole thing with expanding a world, but I don't know, maybe that's just me. Another thing to touch on is the transformations. Another staple of the Banjo games, but they had their own issues here of being largely situational for specific pages, or simply weren't that fun to control. I wasn't a fan of any of these transformations, but at the bare minimum, at least they weren't Tui's washing machine. If I were to give a golden example, one of the best transformations in my opinion was the submarine from Jolly Roger's Lagoon. You were able to complete certain objectives if you wanted, as the submarine. You can fight the boss as the submarine. You don't have to bother with the bear and the bird. It was pretty great. I just don't understand how they didn't translate that over to this game, but I guess they wanted to continue the situational uses, which I don't know, man. I don't know what's going on. And then we come to the boss fights, which I'll talk about all of them briefly, I guess. They fucked these up too, somehow. The first boss fight is Rampo, a literal ramp that you climb up to knock his teeth out, do it 3 times and you win. Not interesting at all. The second boss fight is an ice thing on a wall that moves around faster the more you damage it with the fire breath that you have to use. It's not very good and you're forced to adapt to the terrible camera angle that is forced upon you. The third boss is okay, you fight a tentacle monster thing with eyes on it that you hit quite a few times, but the repetition of the attack phases start to grind on you halfway through. Again, it's okay, nothing particularly special. The fourth boss can go fuck itself because you're forced on the weird Kartos camera angle and these missiles can go suck my dick. The fifth boss is also okay, although on this one you're in the ship transformation that controls in a very stiff way. All of this irritates me a lot, because the bosses in Banjo-Tooie had a select amount of issues that I felt weren't really pursued in addressing when it comes to this game. Sure, the bosses are much different in how they function in Yooka-Laylee in many ways, but there are a lot of concepts in Kazooie, Tooie, and hell, even DK64 that could have used upgrades here in inspiration. Instead, we got this motherfucker. I'll talk about the final fight against Capital B in a second, but I have to talk about the quizzes now. Yes, I said quizzes as plural and not one, because this game for some reason has 3 quizzes in between sectors of Ivory Towers. This is yet another aspect of the game that I have no idea what the developers were thinking when they made them. I guess they didn't want to put the singular quiz at the end of the game that really tests your knowledge of your adventure. Instead, these mini quick-fire quizzes have an extremely low number of unique questions to them, where the only mistakes you'll make is accidentally pressing the A button too quickly because none of these questions are challenging at all. They don't really test your memory as much as the Tower of Tragedy did, nor did it have the weight of the situation either. If you lose, you don't get crushed by a literal ton of weight. Quack just sends you back to the beginning of the quiz, and that's it. It doesn't even throw you into the fire like Grunty's Furnace Fun did if you fucked up a question, despite Yooka and Laylee being above a pool of acid. I don't get it. Let's get to the rest of the levels real quick. The second world, Glitter Glazed Glacier, suffers a lot from the same problems mentioned before. This level really has an emptiness problem and doesn't benefit from the scale that was given to it. The level also contains a large sub-area where you're once again restricted to a specific camera angle and are thrown into what is effectively a confusing maze that doesn't add anything good to the experience. Enjoy it though, because a substantial amount of pages are in this part of the level, so yeah, good luck. If you couldn't tell, I'm not a fan of this level. The third level, Moody Maze March, is thankfully much better and is honestly my favorite level in the game. It has a lot of aspects of a more condensed but still feeling like a big enough level, offering a decent experience. Thank God. The fourth level, the casino, tries to be pretty bold in separating itself from the rest of the game. This level requires the player to collect casino tokens to exchange for pages, and this level sucks ass. It is the very definition of this game lacking in cohesive design, resulting in the level overcompensating its size massively. The repetitiveness in all of the objectives that you have to do in order to acquire more casino tokens doesn't make it any better. Lastly, we have Galleon Galaxy, a more space-themed level which thankfully is better than the previous level. It's a lot like Moody Maze Marsh in its condensed design while still feeling like a big world. However, it's really only that to me. I wasn't particularly interested in the story behind this level either, because by the time I reached this point in the game, I just wanted to be done with it. Again, it's okay, I don't think it's a bad level or anything, I just didn't find it particularly interesting. Before we talk about the endgame, I want to discuss one more thing, which is the music. This game had 3 composers, Grant Kirkhope, David Weiss, and Steve Burke. Now, I fucking love Grant Kirkhope, as I've said before. His work on the N64 Rare titles is fucking legendary, and I will fight everyone on the street who disagrees. But while I was playing the game and listening to the soundtrack, it just didn't stick well with me at all. I don't think the soundtrack is bad or anything, I believe it serves its purpose, but it doesn't jump out to me like Kirkhope's work on the Banjo games. The boss themes and overall level themes of Kazooie and Tooie had this fantastic level of energy and tone to them that Yooka-Laylee's soundtrack could only dream of having. And no, I'm not saying this because of any nostalgic attachment to these games, because if that were the case, I'd be treating Yooka-Laylee hell of a lot more positively. This game feeds off of the feeling of nostalgia, and that's about all I can say for it. It wrote off the idea of being that spiritual successor that many older gamers so desperately wanted. A ton of people want another Banjo game after being burned out by the game we don't talk about in this house, so when Yooka-Laylee came along, that enthusiasm seemed to have come back. But Yooka-Laylee ultimately fails for me. It feels like it's trying to mark off check marks on a list just to be like the Banjo games from 2 decades prior, rather than attempting to make real innovations from the collectathon adventure genre of games. Tooie's entire design philosophy was very different from Kazooie's, but Yooka-Laylee seems to have done very little to do much about separating itself. Everything that Yooka-Laylee does try to do to separate itself from the other games just doesn't fit well with me. We then come to the final fight against Capital B. It was a largely run-of-the-mill fight until Capital B begins to shoot missiles in the air at you, which means that you have to use the gliding ability to guide the missiles in hitting Capital B. Unfortunately, with the stiff movement and forced camera angle, this was very annoying to do. After Yooka and Laylee win, this whole secret organization, Vile, is brought up that is actually pulling the strings, and they want the book because it can rewrite the universe, and blah 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 blah. I don't really care. With the aforementioned lacking dialogue, gameplay, jokes, and just everything, this ending didn't feel very satisfying to achieve. The game ends in a party with very little done on unique character animation and just opts to copy-paste a bunch of characters. God damn it. Look, I know that I said I hated playing through this game, but I have to at least say that it has this level of polish to where I can't say it's inherently bad. I'm sure there's plenty of fun to be had for people who get raked into the nostalgia trip, but I just can't. I can't do it. If you enjoyed this game, props to you. I don't understand how people could, given everything that's confused or infuriated me about this game, but I guess that's just me. I'm glad I gave this game another chance, but I can finally put it to rest. In the meantime, I'm gonna go play a much better game. Big thanks to my wonderful channel members. Big thanks to BusyRobotHands, Danny Boy, Riddle of Lightning, Dead in the Shed, Aishi, and B.